Fluorescent light above the back stairwell had been flickering for 3 weeks. I know that because I'd put in the maintenance request myself twice, and both times my office manager told me the repair crew was on it. That flickering light is the detail I keep coming back to, even now, even after everything, because if it hadn't been flickering, I never would have called the building's electrical contractor that Tuesday morning. And if I hadn't called him, I never would have been standing in the parking garage at 7:42 a.m. when he waved me over and said quietly, so quietly I almost didn't hear him over the hum of the ventilation system, "Don't use the front entrance today, Miss Loretta. Go around back. And do it now before anyone sees you pull in." His name was Frank. He'd been doing electrical work in our building for 11 years. He wasn't the kind of man who made things dramatic. He wore the same grey uniform every time I saw him, carried the same dented metal toolbox, and never once made small talk beyond weather and sports scores. So when Frank looked at me with that expression, serious, almost sorry, I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I drove around to the service entrance parked between 2 delivery trucks and followed him through the back corridor that smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet. I was 63 years old, and I'd built my company from a folding table in my garage. That morning I almost lost everything I'd spent 35 years creating. Let me back up, because if I start at that parking garage you'll think this is a story about a crooked employee and a lucky break. It's that, yes, but it's also about me, about what I allowed to happen because I stopped paying attention to the things that mattered most and started trusting a version of my business that existed only on paper. I started Whitfield Home Care Services in 1991. It was just me and my sister-in-law at first. She handled the scheduling, I handled everything else. We placed home health aides with elderly clients in the greater Columbus, Ohio area. Nothing glamorous, nothing that made the business pages of any newspaper. But we were reliable, we were licensed, and we genuinely cared about the families we served. That counted for something. Slowly, then steadily, it counted for a lot. By 2010, we had 62 employees. By 28, we had over 200. We'd expanded into 3 counties, opened a second administrative office in Dublin, and won the Better Business Bureau's Integrity Award 2 years running. My sister-in-law had retired by then. Her knees, she said, though I think it was also just time. And I had brought in professional staff to run the parts of the business I couldn't manage alone anymore. The man I hired to run finance was named Conrad. Conrad came with an MBA from Ohio State, 12 years of experience at a regional healthcare staffing firm, and references that checked out perfectly. He was organized, articulate, and never once raised his voice. In 10 years, I can count on one hand the number of times he was late to a meeting. My son thought he was great. My accountant trusted him. I trusted him. That is the part of this story I have to sit with the longest. The anniversary party had been planned for months. 35 years in business. We'd rented out a ballroom at the Hilton on Broad Street, ordered custom floral arrangements, sent engraved invitations to clients and partners and community leaders going back 2 decades. My daughter-in-law had helped me pick out a navy dress. My son had written a toast. I'd had my hair done the Friday before. The party was on a Thursday evening. Frank stopped me on a Tuesday morning. I followed him through the back corridor and into the small conference room we used for vendor meetings, the one with the sticky window latch and the ancient whiteboard that still had a phone number written on it from 2015. He closed the door. He set his toolbox on the floor, and then he said, without any preamble at all, "I was doing the wiring check in the server room yesterday afternoon. I wasn't supposed to be in there past 4, but the junction panel took longer than I thought. Your finance director and 2 other men came in around 5:15. They didn't see me. I was behind the rack units. I don't think they knew anyone was still in there." He stopped. I said, "What did you hear?" He looked at the wall for a moment. Then he looked back at me. They were talking about the accounts, about moving funds before the anniversary quarter closed. One of the men said something about the audit trail being clean enough. And your finance director, Conrad, he said she won't look at the raw files. She never does. The room got very still. I heard the ventilation system. I heard a door close somewhere down the hall. I heard my own heartbeat, which had changed its rhythm in a way I hadn't felt since the week my husband was in the hospital. "Are you certain?" I asked. Frank picked up his toolbox. "Miss Loretta," he said, "I've been doing electrical work in commercial buildings for 26 years. I know the difference between men talking about their lunch order and men talking about something they don't want witnessed." He paused at the door. "I thought about whether to tell you. All last night I thought about it. I decided you deserved to know." Then he left. And I sat in that conference room with the sticky window latch and the ancient whiteboard, and I tried to figure out what to do next. I want to tell you that I immediately called my lawyer and the authorities and handled everything swiftly and correctly. But that's not what happened. What happened is that I sat in that room for nearly 20 minutes and went through every reason this couldn't possibly be true. Conrad had been with me for 10 years. He'd helped us survive the 2020 funding crisis when Medicare reimbursement rates shifted and we had to restructure 3 service lines simultaneously. He'd caught an overbilling error from one of our vendors that saved us $40,000. He'd sent flowers when my husband died. But then I thought about the last 18 months. The way Conrad had started handling the quarterly reviews differently, presenting summary dashboards instead of the raw spreadsheets I used to review page by page. The way he'd mentioned twice that I didn't need to get into the weeds on the new billing software. The way a question I'd asked about one specific client account last fall had produced an explanation so elaborate and reassuring that I'd stopped asking. He was right. I didn't look at the raw files. I hadn't in over a year. I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew I could trust without question. My daughter-in-law answered on the second ring. She was a CPA, had been for 15 years. She worked for a firm in Westerville, handled commercial audits. I had never once asked her to look at my books. I'd always been careful about keeping family and business separate. But I called her that morning without hesitating, and I said, "Teresa, I need you. I need you today. Don't tell my son yet. Just come." She was at the service entrance within 40 minutes. We worked from my private office with the door locked. I pulled the raw accounting files, the ones Conrad had been summarizing for me instead of presenting directly, and watched Teresa go through them with the particular focus of someone who has been trained to find exactly what people try to hide. It took her about 2 hours to find the first discrepancy, then the second, then what she called, in a very calm and level voice, a systematic pattern of fund diversion going back approximately 14 months. The method was not complicated, but it was careful. Conrad had established a shell vendor, a home care supply company with a real business license but no actual operations, and had been routing invoices through it for services that were either duplicate billed or entirely fabricated. The amounts per transaction were small enough to fall below our standard review thresholds. Cumulatively, over 14 months, they totaled just under $219,000. He had also, Teresa discovered, been in preliminary conversations with a larger regional home care conglomerate about a potential acquisition. The conversations appeared to have started about 16 months ago. She found the email thread mirrored in a shared folder Conrad had been syncing to a personal cloud account. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was trying to make the company look financially unstable so it could be acquired cheaply. and he was apparently positioned to receive a finder's fee or something more from the acquiring company. The anniversary party was in 48 hours. I am not going to pretend I kept it together perfectly after that. I didn't. I sat at my desk and I was very, very quiet for a while, which is what I do instead of crying in front of people. Teresa sat across from me and didn't say anything either. She understood, maybe better than anyone, that what I was absorbing wasn't just the financial figure. It was the 10 years. It was the flowers when my husband died. It was the voice in my head that said she won't look at the raw files. She never does. I had let that happen, not the theft. That was Conrad's choice and Conrad's crime. But I had made myself easy to deceive, and I had to sit with that. Eventually Teresa said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to do this right." We called my attorney that afternoon. She came to the office within the hour. I had known her for 22 years and she didn't ask unnecessary questions. We called our external auditor. We did not call the police ourselves. My attorney advised that we let the Financial Crimes Unit handle the referral after we'd documented everything properly, which we spent the next 30 hours doing. We did not tip off Conrad. He came to work Wednesday morning, nodded at me in the hallway, and asked if I was excited about the party. I said yes, I was looking forward to it. I smiled the way you smile when something is sitting inside your chest like a stone. My attorney had a conversation with the county prosecutor's office on Wednesday afternoon. Conrad was met by investigators before he reached his car in the parking garage on Wednesday evening. I found out about it from my attorney at 7:14 p.m. I was sitting in my kitchen eating soup I didn't taste. I'll tell you what I did not expect. I did not expect my son's reaction. He found out Wednesday night. Teresa told him after Conrad was in custody, when there was nothing left to be done and no decisions left for him to inadvertently complicate. He drove straight to my house. He sat at my kitchen table and said, Mom, why didn't you call me?" And I told him the truth. I said, "Because this is my company, and because I needed to know I could still handle it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You could have let me help." It was such a simple thing to say. And it hit me harder than almost anything that had happened in the previous 36 hours, because I realized he was right, and I realized he'd been right for a long time. My son had been asking to be more involved in the business for 3 years. He'd sit across from me at family dinners and mention things he'd read about the home care industry or regulations coming out of CMS or technology platforms other agencies were using, and I'd listen politely and then redirect the conversation or tell him we'd talk about it later. I had trusted a man with an MBA and good references for 10 years. I had not once let my own son look at a balance sheet. I kept that thought to myself that night, but I didn't let go of it. The 35th anniversary party happened Thursday as planned. I thought about cancelling it. My attorney said it would be premature. The legal proceedings would take months, and there was no reason to disrupt our clients, our staff, or our community, standing based on something we had handled appropriately. She was right. And honestly, I also needed it. I needed to stand in that ballroom and look at the faces of the people who had worked with me and trusted me and sent their parents into our care, and remember what we had built. My son gave his toast. He talked about what it means to watch your mother build something from nothing year after year without asking for recognition. He said I had taught him that integrity wasn't a strategy. It was a decision you made every morning before anything else happened. He didn't know that I was thinking about Conrad when he said it. He didn't know that I was also thinking about the flickering light, and Frank in his grey uniform, and Teresa at my kitchen table with her reading glasses on, and her legal pad filling up with numbers I should have been looking at myself. I thanked everyone for being there. I talked about the next chapter. What I didn't say, but what I've been thinking about ever since, is this. 35 years ago I built this company because I believed in doing something that mattered. Somewhere in the last several years, I started managing it instead of leading it. I started trusting the summary instead of the source. I stopped asking the uncomfortable questions because it was easier to believe that everything was fine, and I had people around me, good, qualified people who could handle the details. That instinct was not wrong. You cannot scale a business if you insist on touching every detail yourself. But I had handed over too much, and to the wrong person. And I had kept the right person, my own son, at arm's length, for reasons that had more to do with my own need to feel indispensable than with anything else. I sat with that for a long time. Conrad was formally charged with wire fraud, theft by deception, and breach of fiduciary duty 8 weeks after the party. His attorney entered a not guilty plea, which everyone expected. The case is ongoing as I record this, but our documentation was thorough, and my attorney is confident. The shell vendor was dissolved. We recovered a significant portion of the diverted funds through the civil process. The acquisition conversations Conrad had been facilitating went nowhere once the principals on the other side understood what they'd been participating in. We hired a new CFO, a woman named Patricia, who came recommended by our external auditor and who presented me with actual spreadsheets at our very first meeting and told me she expected me to ask questions. I told her I intended to, and my son, I gave him a real seat at the table, not a ceremonial one, not sit in on this meeting so you can learn the culture, a real seat. He's been leading our technology and compliance initiative for the past 4 months, and he has already identified 2 operational inefficiencies that will save us, conservatively, $60,000 a year going forward. I should have done it sooner. That's not a comfortable thing to write, but it's true. Frank finished the electrical work that Tuesday. The light in the back stairwell stopped flickering. He sent an invoice for 4 hours of labor, same as always, and I paid it. I also sent him a handwritten note, which I understand might seem inadequate given the circumstances, but I didn't know how else to say what I wanted to say, which was, thank you for deciding that I deserved to know. Thank you for the 26 years of experience that told you the difference between normal conversation and something that needed a witness. Thank you for trusting me with what you heard when you could have just as easily decided it wasn't your problem. He wrote back 3 weeks later. A short note on a piece of plain white paper, in handwriting that looked like a man who'd spent his life using his hands for other things. It said, "You built something worth protecting. Glad you got to keep it. I keep it in my desk drawer." I have told this story to a few people close to me, and the question they always ask at the end is some version of, "How did you trust him for so long?" The honest answer is that I trusted the story I'd built around him. I trusted the references and the credentials and the 11 years of competent performance. And I trusted the comfort of not having to worry about finance, because I had plenty of other things to worry about. Trusting Conrad meant I could focus elsewhere. It was efficient. It made sense. What I did not account for was the possibility that someone could be genuinely good at their job for a long time, earn real credibility, and then decide to use that credibility against you, not in the first year, not when they're still proving themselves, later, when they've calculated that they've earned enough trust to make a move. That is a particular kind of betrayal, the slow-built kind. I don't know that there's a complete defense against it, but there are practices that reduce your exposure, and I had let those practices lapse because they were inconvenient, and because I had stopped being curious about my own numbers. I am curious again. Every Monday morning, I look at the raw reports. I ask questions. I have given the people around me explicit permission to tell me when something doesn't look right, even if they think I won't want to hear it. And I have accepted, finally, that building a company and holding on to it alone are not the same accomplishment. The building is what I've always been proud of. The holding on alone, that was something else. That was pride in a shape I didn't recognize until it almost cost me everything. If you are watching this and you have built something, a business, a career, a reputation, and you have people around you that you trust completely without checking, I am not telling you that they are lying to you. I am telling you that I know how it feels to believe that the people you rely on are as invested in your success as you are. And I am telling you that verification is not distrust. Looking at the actual numbers is not an insult to the person who summarizes them for you. Asking the uncomfortable question is not a sign that you've lost faith. It is a sign that you're still paying attention. 35 years ago, I built this company from a folding table in my garage because I paid attention to every single detail. At some point, I stopped. I got comfortable. I got busy. I let someone else's competence become a substitute for my own vigilance. I kept the company. I kept the anniversary. I kept my son close. Finally, the way I should have a long time ago. But I want you to think about this. I almost didn't, and the only reason I didn't lose everything I built was a flickering light, a maintenance request I'd filed twice, and a man named Frank who decided at 5:15 on a Monday afternoon that staying an extra 40 minutes to finish a junction panel was worth it. Tell me, if you had been standing in that parking garage at 7:42 a.m. and a man you barely knew pulled you aside and told you something you didn't want to hear about, someone you'd trusted for a decade, would you have listened? Would you have followed him through the back entrance? Would you have had the courage to look at what you'd been afraid to see? Leave me your answer in the comments. I read every one. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what I would call the central lesson of all of this, and I keep arriving at the same place. The consequences we live with are almost always the result of decisions we stopped noticing we were making. I didn't decide one morning to stop being vigilant about my own company. I decided hundreds of small times over several years that the summary was enough, that the dashboard was sufficient, that Conrad was reliable, and therefore the numbers beneath his reliability didn't need my eyes on them. Each one of those small decisions felt reasonable in the moment. Collectively, they built the conditions that allowed someone to take $219,000 from me over 14 months without my noticing. That is what I mean by consequences. We stop noticing we're creating. The outcome looked sudden. It wasn't. It was the accumulated result of comfort and of a particular kind of intellectual laziness that I had never permitted myself in the first 30 years of building this company, but had slowly allowed in the years when things were going well, and I told myself I had earned the right to delegate more fully. There is a version of this story where Frank doesn't stay late to finish that junction panel, where he packs up at 4 o'clock, the way his schedule said he should, and I walk through the front entrance the next morning and shake Conrad's hand and spend 2 more days preparing for an anniversary party that celebrates a company being quietly hollowed out beneath me. That version of this story exists. I came very close to living it. What saved me wasn't luck exactly. It was that Frank had spent 26 years developing the judgment to know when something was wrong, that Teresa had spent 15 years developing the skill to find what people tried to hide in numbers, that I had, despite everything, built relationships over decades with people who were honest enough to tell me what I needed to hear instead of what was comfortable. Those relationships were not accidents. They were the result of years of treating people with enough respect that they felt some obligation to me in return. Frank didn't have to say a word to me in that parking garage. He chose to. That choice came from somewhere. I believe it came from the 11 years of being treated like his work mattered, like he wasn't invisible, like I noticed him. I cannot prove that, but I believe it, and my son, the conversation I should have had with him 3 years earlier, the seat at the table I kept not offering, that delay was its own kind of cost. Not financial, but real. There are years of partnership we don't get back. There is trust that has to be rebuilt differently now, from an honest starting point, which is better than the alternative, but still carries the weight of what took so long. Resilience to me is not the ability to survive crisis without being changed by it. That's just endurance. Real resilience is surviving the crisis and then doing the harder thing, looking clearly at what you contributed to the conditions that made it possible, and changing those things without excuses and without excuses and without excuses and without excessive self-punishment. Just clearly, just honestly. Then differently. I kept the company. I kept the legacy my sister-in-law and I built from nothing. I kept Frank's note in my desk drawer, and I take it out sometimes when I need to remember what it actually cost to get here. What I also kept, and this is the part I want you to hold on to, is the understanding that the people around you will almost always tell you the truth, if you have given them enough reason to believe it matters. The question is whether you've built that, and whether you're still paying enough attention to hear it when it comes.